All right. So let's pick up what we were talking about. We're talking about who depression affects. So depression can affect anyone. And I started this study one day when I started to feel depressed. I felt the symptoms coming on me, which is what? I felt sadness. I felt that heavy spirit coming up on me. And the reason why I knew that it was depression is because I've had a full-blown major depression before. Now, we're going to talk about some of the things that causes depression and some of the factors that can cause depression. And so as I was feeling down and I was feeling downtrodden, I asked the Lord, like, I'm a Christian. Should I really be feeling depression? Is this telling me something that I am not being a good, true Christian because I'm feeling depressed? And so the Lord sent me into this study. It took me a while to put this presentation together because there's so many pieces of it. It's a long study. And so the Lord showed me that this is something that is affecting humanity. It's not just affecting me. I'm not the only one here in my corner being affected by depression. Children are going through depression. Adults are going through depression. Elderly are going through depression. And it is so silent because no one wants to talk about it. Everyone just deals with it by themselves. And when it's usually very severe, people kill themselves. And so it ends up being the #2 killer in America, suicide. And so the Lord has placed on my heart today to talk about depression because this is something that affects us all as humans, Christians and non-Christians. So let us look at some of the factors that play a role in depression. Number 1, your biochemistry, which talks about the chemicals in your brain. This can contribute to depression. So we're talking about the serotonin and the norepinephrine, your neurotransmitters, and we're going to get deeper into that. So your biochemistry, how you're made up. Let's talk about genetics. Depression do run in families. Known fact that there's a genome that goes from family to family that carries the gene of depression. There's a famous study that has been done. They have studied twins. And you know, the twins have similar, identical DNA. And it shows that when one twin has depression, there's a 70% chance that the other twin will have depression sometime in life. Let's talk about your personality. People with low self-esteem, those who are easily overwhelmed by stress, those that are pessimistic, always looking at the negative in life, they're more likely to experience depression. Let's look about your environment, your environmental factors, where you grew up. If you grew up seeing violence and crime, then you are going to be more prone to depression. If you've been neglected or abused, you're going to be more prone to depression. How about those that grew up in poverty, that had no way out? They didn't have the means to provide for their daily living. They're going to be more depressed. So all these factors play a role in depression, not just one thing. Not just one thing. So let's talk about the impact of depression on the mind, on the brain. So it is a popular lore that people says that emotions reside in the heart. Then when you think about love, you love from your heart, right? So they always connotate emotion with the heart. But science have shown that your seat of emotion is where? In the brain. Certain areas of the brain helps regulate your mood. So your mood and how you feel doesn't come from your heart. It comes from your brain. And there are specific parts of your brain that regulates this mood. There are certain chemicals and nerve cell connections, neural cell growth and how they function. All these things tie into your emotion. Think about it as an electrical box, or how your house is wired. And it's wired into that big box on the side of the house. What do you call that again? That breaker box, right? So your house is electrical, your car is electrical. When there is a disruption in the paneling and in the wiring of your brain, then you're going to have problems along the line. So if you have a problem with the wiring going to your radio is not going to work, right? So if you have a problem wiring to the lights on your car, then your lights won't work. Even if you change the bulb, the light is not going to come on because there's a problem in the wiring, the electrical circuits. So your brain also is electrical. It is wired by neurons and dendrites, and how they connect and communicate. These things have to all work together. And when there's a dysfunction, then we have problems in how you feel and how you think. And so we can look at this, and this can be proven with technology. Today they have PET scans and MRIs, and they have led to a better understanding of how the brain works. They can see the region in your brain that regulates mood and how others function. So they're also looking at your memory and how this may be affected by depression. And this can be seen, brothers and sisters, on a PET scan or an MRI. It's amazing. And now they have identified that depression plays a significant role, and they have identified the parts of the brain, the amygdala, the thalamus, and the hippocampus. These are parts of the brain that directly affect how your mood works. So we see here that depression is not a demon spirit upon you. It is a medical illness. It is physical. It is just like hypertension, just like a stroke. It can be identified and it can be fixed. Let's take a look at this next clip.
Depression is a complex disease, one that can be triggered by several factors, including chemical imbalances in the brain, medical conditions, traumatic life events, and genetics. But depression can start to lift within just a few weeks, provided you find the right combination of effective treatments. This is Your Brain On, where we explore how the world affects our brains and ourselves. Brain imaging studies show that depression is connected to changes in several parts of the brain, especially in 3 core areas. The first is the amygdala, which regulates emotions like anger, pleasure, and fear. When a person is depressed, the amygdala can become overactive, causing problems with sleep and behavior, as well as balance of key mood hormones. The second area is the hippocampus, which processes memory and regulates stress hormones such as cortisol. One study found it's up to 13% smaller in depressed women, and excess cortisol can stunt the growth of new neurons, creating poor moods and memory. The third main area is the thalamus, which helps link sensory information to good and bad feelings. Problems in the thalamus may be linked to conditions such as bipolar disorder. Changes to these parts of the brain and others mess with key hormones, such as serotonin, which regulates sleep and mood, and norepinephrine, which affects motivation. For some, a depressed mood passes on its own, especially if it was triggered by a particular sad event. But for those with ongoing clinical depression, it can take time to find effective treatment. Stats show sticking with treatment is worth it. One study by the National Institutes of Health showed 80% of people improved within just 4 to 6 weeks of starting medication, therapy, or support groups. Healthy lifestyle choices can help too. Eating a good diet and getting enough sleep can strengthen and repair important brain connections. Overcoming depression may become easier in the future. Scientists are learning more about how factors such as genetics influence depression, which may not only help create new drugs, but also make targeted treatment possible, helping someone with depression feel like herself again.
All right, so let's go talk a little bit deeper into that. So we're seeing here that we have the theory back in the early 1900s. We had a lot of people that were committed to the mental ward. When you're depressed and down, your family don't know how to deal with you. And so they just throw you into the ward. There was one known famous mental institution called Bellevue, filled with people until they were lining beds in the hallway because the families just did not know how to deal with someone with a mental illness. When you're depressed and down, you don't want to brush your teeth, you don't want to comb your hair, you can't get you out of bed. The families can't deal with that. And now the science behind it is showing you that we can directly identify the parts of your brain that is being affected. So if they can find the cause, then there's going to be a what? A cure. They can fix it. So let's look at the amygdala. There's the figure of the brain here that shows you how it is affected. So if you look here, this is what we're talking about here. Right here is your frontal lobe. This is your seat of reasoning. And as Christians, this is the part of the brain that we want to protect, because this is where God communicates with us. This is your reasoning factor, right? Here is your thalamus under here. So in here, brothers and sisters, is your subconscious, also called your limbic system, your feeling system, correct? So this is what we're talking about here. Your thalamus is right here. Your amygdala is on this end here. And the hippocampus is to the back part of your brain here. It actually connects to the spine down here. So this here, we're talking about your subconscious brain, your limbic system, your feeling system. God here wants to regulate and strengthen your frontal lobe here, which is your reasoning, which is different from your feeling part. So usually the part here that is affected most by depression is your feeling part, your subconscious, your limbic system. And these parts of the brain here, when it is affected some way or another, can cause depression. So let's look into that briefly. The amygdala, this part here of your brain, this little part that looks like a little tail. It is part of the limbic system, a group of structures deep in the brain that is associated with emotions such as anger, pleasure, sorrow, fear, and sexual arousal. The amygdala is activated when a person recalls emotionally charged memories, such as a frightening situation. Activities in the amygdala is higher when a person is sad or critically depressed. So what it's saying, when you're depressed, the amygdala is working faster, it's overstimulated. It's moving faster, it's sparking more than it should, okay? And if these activities continue, it says that this increased activity continues even after recovery from depression. So even after you feel better, the amygdala is still working. And if it continues to work, brothers and sisters, it's going to crash after a while, okay? Let's look at the next one. The thalamus. The thalamus here, right here, looks like a half of a fruit, right? This thalamus receives most sensory information and relays it to the appropriate part of the cerebral cortex, which directs high-level functions such as speech, behavioral reaction, movement, thinking, and learning. Can you see now why, when you're depressed, why your speech gets slower? Can you see why your movement gets slower? Can you see why you just can't process things rationally? Because this part of the brain that deals with speech, behavioral reactions, movement, thinking, and learning is being affected. And you can see that on the outside when you're depressed. They just can't shake and snap out of it because the brain is being affected. And some research suggests that bipolar disorder may result from problems in the thalamus, which helps link sensory input to pleasure and unpleasant feeling. So we're talking about depression, but bipolar is a sister to depression. Bipolar is when the person's experience depression, very low feeling, and on the other hand, they can cycle to mania or manic feeling where they're doing everything overactively. So this is when they feel great, they can do everything great, they don't sleep for days. For those that are creative, this is when they're most creative. I will dare say that most artists, most actors, most sculptors, and all those creative people, most of them are bipolar. And they'll tell you, half of these actors in Hollywood are bipolar. And they'll tell you, I love being manic because this is when I am most creative. I feel great on top of the world. This is when I think that people can't keep up with me. Come on, guys, let's get it. They don't sleep for days. They can't sleep because they're on the other end of the spectrum where they're going so fast. So that is bipolarism. You have one level that is going super fast, and then after that mania, comes the depression, where they crash. Everything slowed down. They can't get themselves out of bed. That too is linked here with the thalamus. Here is the hippocampus. It is part of the limbic system and a central role in processing long-term memory and recollection. Right? So when something has happened to you in the past, say you've been bitten by a dog. Every time you see a dog, what's going to happen? You're going to recall that event, right? That is the hippocampus. When you see an aggressive dog, you're going to remember being bitten. And that fight and flight notion is going to kick in. Because you're going to say, you know what? This dog is probably going to bite me. I remember being bitten before. And so the hippocampus is the part of the brain that will always bring back these long-term memories and recollection. And so this can be affected in the brain. It says that the hippocampus is usually smaller in some depressed people. Research suggests that ongoing exposure to stress hormone impairs the growth of nerve cell in this part of the brain. So if you're constantly in a stressful situation, constantly being bombarded, your nerves can't even grow. You won't be where you should be mentally because the stress hormone impairs the growth of nerve cells. And so we have to think about all these things when we think about depression. Let's talk about that nerve cell communication. And this is what I was talking about earlier with being electrical. The ultimate goal in treating the biology of depression is to improve the brain's ability to regulate the mood. Because we know that depression is a mood disorder. And so if your brain has a problem with regulating the mood, then we have to try to figure out what part of the brain is being affected. We know that neurotransmitters are not the only important part of the machinery, right? We talked about 3 major parts of the brain. Now we're going to talk about the neurotransmitter, how it actually happens. But let's not diminish their importance either. They are deeply involved in how nerve cells communicate with each other. And they are a component of brain function that we can often influence to good ends. So this can be influenced. So the neurotransmitters are chemicals that relay messages from one neuron to another. So when we talk about your brain cells, and we always joke in Jamaica, I don't know if it's only Jamaica, but we always joke that when we see the Rastamen smoking their marijuana, we're like, yeah, they're killing off their brain cells, right? And so there goes one less brain cell. So the brain cell is called a neuron. And in order for the neurons to work, they transmit messages from neuron to neuron. And antidepressant medication tends to increase the concentration of some of these substances in between the spaces, in between the neurons. And I have a video to show you how that works. In between each neuron, there's a space. And the space allows the neurotransmitters to move from one neuron to the other. That space is called a synapse. And so we're going to see that when there's not enough brain cells, when there's not enough neurons, when there's too much or too little neurotransmitter, then we're going to have a problem with how the brain functions. Let's take a look at that.
You or someone you know may have been diagnosed with a mental health problem. This video will show you some ways that could make the problem a lot better. While there are currently no known cures for most mental illness, the good news is that recovery is possible. Most people diagnosed with a mental illness can experience relief from their symptoms by actively participating in an individual treatment plan. Common treatment options include psychotherapy, also known as talk therapy or counseling, and medication. Medications for mental illnesses are thought to work on your brain cells, called neurons. In doing so, they increase brain activity in certain areas or decrease activity in others. This can help reduce your symptoms. For example, some medications work to make more naturally occurring chemical messengers available. These chemicals pass signals between your brain cells. It is important for brain cells to have enough of these chemicals in the space between them to pass the signals. If you have depression, you may not have enough of certain chemical messengers in this space. In general, the use of antidepressant medications results in the buildup of certain chemical messengers in this space. This buildup improves signal transfer, and your mood may improve as a result. Other medications work differently or in ways not yet known. In addition to depression, other common mental illnesses that can be treated with medications include schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, also known as manic depressive disorder, and many others. If you have schizophrenia, your healthcare professional or doctor may prescribe antipsychotic medications. A mood stabilizer is usually the first choice as medication taken on a regular basis if you have bipolar disorder. Other medications prescribed for bipolar disorder include antipsychotics, antidepressants, or drugs known as atypical antipsychotics. Mental illnesses are common. You may have a mental illness not discussed in this video, or you may have been prescribed other types of medication. Talk to your healthcare professional or doctor if you have questions about your medication or have any side effects.
All right. So the reason why I showed that video is for you to see that little animation of how the the cells communicate with each other. Isn't God good? That is amazing, how God creates these nerve cells. So let's look at a nerve cell. Here, this is the dendrites of the neuron itself. It has a long, long tail, and then it's covered by myelin sheath, which protects the brain. On the end of these is where the communication takes place. This is our electrical wires in our brain, so to speak. And we know from recent studies that a person with Alzheimer's, when they do their study, they notice that their myelin sheaths have all been removed or damaged. And that's one of the reasons why they're saying there's certain things that cause Alzheimer's. And when they look at the brain, this part of it, the myelin sheath, is what's pretty much damaged in a person with Alzheimer's. I'm just throwing it out there. But we want to see that every part of the structure of the nerve cell or the neuron is important for how the brain functions. So the neurons have to have a good myelin sheath. It has to have good connections with the other nerve cell, and then it has to transmit enough neurotransmitter for it to actually work. And so if it's putting out too much information or it's putting out too little information, then that will affect how the brain functions. You see how that works? So it's a combination here of electrical and chemicals. So I don't want to get too deep into it. I just wanted you to see what a brain cell actually looks like. And it was known back in the days that when you lost a brain cell, when one of these cells die, that it was known that you have lost it forever, because they thought that new brain cells cannot come. You can't grow new brain cells once the new nerve cell have died. But we know, and we'll talk about that further on, that even though this cell may die, there are ways to produce more brain cell. All right, isn't that good news? Not once lost, lost forever. That was a scientific fact back in the days, that once you lose your brain cell, that's it. You can't get any more brain cell. That's it. You're going to be dumbed down forever. But that's not what the Lord, who has created this body so wonderfully, is showing you. And what I wanted to stress here is that your brain, brothers and sisters, is also electrical. This is your electrical panel in the brain. Your brain is made up of water. It's made up of fat. It needs cholesterol to live. These cells here need liquid, and it needs fat. It needs sugar in order to function. And so everything that we do, everything that we eat, has to be balanced so that the brain can get what it needs. And so it is important that we can understand how our body works. Our brain is chemical and electrical. So we have to remember that things can happen to it, like an electrical shortage, right? So we know that it's a combination of electrical and chemical signals that goes in between the spaces that causes communication, all right? And so when the transmitters are being suppressed or there's not enough, then we know that we'll have a problem with how it works, okay? I don't want to get too technical. So let's talk about the types of neurotransmitters that are there. There's the acetylcholine. What that does, it enhances memory and is involved in how you learn and recall. So for those of us who are always studying and you're like, you know what, I can never remember what I'm studying. I could study all I want, but I will never recall it. Every time I go to the test, I draw a blank. What is happening to you? Your acetylcholine is not, you don't have enough. It's not functioning. You should be able to recall what you're studying. So there is a dysfunction somewhere. Let's talk about serotonin. Serotonin is another neurotransmitter. This deals with sleep, appetite, mood, and inhibits pain. So here, if you're not sleeping well, if you're not eating well, if all these things are off, then we're going to think about the serotonin level. And we know that in a depressed person, the serotonin level is usually lower. It is proven. When they commit suicide, brothers and sisters, and they do the autopsy, they're looking directly at the brain. And this is what they have found. Low levels of serotonin in a depressed mind. And they said that this is a byproduct that leads to an increased risk of suicide. And so we can see here that it is physical, that we can now say that depression is a medical illness. Illness of the mind. Another transmitter is called norepinephrine. This causes constriction of the blood vessels, which raises your blood pressure, right? And this may trigger anxiety in some depressed people. And so we have to be looking out for that. Dopamine. Dopamine is another neurotransmitter. And this influences your motivation. And it plays a role in how a person perceives reality. And so they always say that for runners, those who run long distances, they call it a runner's high, right? You feel so good because your dopamine is higher, okay? And so it is also known that if you have a problem with dopamine transmission, you'll have psychosis. You'll feel distorted in your thinking. You may even have hallucinations and delusions. What are the difference between the two? Hallucination is when you're hearing voices or seeing things that you think is there that is really not, right? But when you're deluded, you're in a reality that only you can see. It is not true, but that's what you think. Most times it is, most people, when they're going through delusions, they're thinking it's usually a paranoid delusion that someone is out to hurt them. And they even will look at you, who are their brothers and sisters, who live in their same houses, will think that you are out to get them because they're being deluded. The thought process in their mind is their dopamine is low. It is not functioning well. It is telling them that everyone is out to kill me, including their own parents who have taken care of them for years. And there is a certain story that I came across, is this lady was taking care of her son that was a known schizophrenic. The doctors didn't know what they could do for him. They did the best that they could, but they didn't have all the technology that we have now and the information. Do you know what happened to him? He killed his mother because he thought that she was out to kill him. And he took a sword and stabbed her through the heart, and she died because he was in a delusion. When he came out of it, he didn't even know that he killed his mother. He had no idea. So this is showing you that when the dopamine, the neurotransmitters in your mind is off balance, then it can cause you to do things that you have no idea or no thought process of. You had no way of knowing that that's what you're going to do. Okay? Let's look at one last one. The glutamate. This is a small molecule believed to act as an excitatory neurotransmitter, and it plays a role in bipolar and schizophrenia. So this is, and I put it up there because this medication is in all of the medications that they use to treat a mental disorder, because what it does, it brings down the excitability of the neurotransmitter. So it is actually good, so they say. Okay? So this glutamate, and it's going to come up later on, is what is a major component in the medications that they use to treat these disorders. Now, what is the Lord saying? Philippians 4:6-7. We see that the brain can be excited. We see that the brain is affected and what it can do to someone in depression. But the Lord says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your request be known unto God. And so if you're experiencing depression and you're feeling down and out, even if your thought processes are not what it should be, the Lord says, let your request be known unto him, and he will help you. He will help you. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and mind through Jesus Christ. Even when you're at the low stages of depression, you can still reach out to God, and he will be there to help you. As you have heard before, everything that I've talked about and the little videos that I've played, they talk about see a therapist. They talk about medication, right? This is what man is trying to do for themselves. But God here is saying, let your request be known unto me. What is it that you want? Lord, I want to feel better. I feel down and out. I feel depressed. I feel like I can't get out of my bed today. I'm having these negative thoughts. Talk to God. Be specific with him. Not that he doesn't know. He knows how you're feeling, but he wants you to reach out your hand to him, and he will be there to help you. So there is a way to overcome depression, and we will see that later. So we just talk about the brain and how it affects depression. Now let's look at genes and how they affect the mood and depression, your genetics. Every part of your body, including your brain, is controlled by your genes. Genes make proteins that are involved in biological processes. Throughout life, different genes turn on and off so that in the best case, they make the right proteins at the right time. So what it is saying here, when a baby's been formed in the tummy and the genetics is being formed, right? If the genetics have been disrupted or it's being affected by something, then the genes won't function the way they should. Your genes in your body is like your light switch. It turns on and off what it needs to do, right? So if you are coming from a family that has diabetes, there's a gene for diabetes in your family, but it is activated or deactivated. When you activate that gene, you too will become diabetic. Doesn't mean that if it runs in your family, you will have it. It is like a light switch. You have to turn it on. So the depression gene, even though it flows through your family, doesn't mean that you have to activate it. Doesn't mean that it's going to be turned on for you. And so mood is affected by dozens of genes. As our genetic endower is different, so does our depression. So it could be in your family line. It could be in your family line that you have anger issues. But that doesn't mean that you have to be affected by this, because it is an on and off switch. It has to be turned on and off. Let's look at something else that affects depression. Stressful life events. Who here have ever been through a stressful life event? Everyone. Everyone have been through a stressful life event. At some point, everyone encounters stressful life events. If it's the death of a loved one, the loss of a job, an illness, a relationship that's spiraling out of control. Some must cope with early loss of a parent, with violence, with sexual abuse, while not everyone who faces these stressors develop a mood disorder. In fact, not everyone who goes through a hard life event will become depressed, but it plays an important role. Your genetic makeup influences how sensitive you are to stressful life events. So your genes will play a role with how you can cope with stress, right? So if you're an extra sensitive person and you can't handle stress and it's on your genome, when you come into a stressful event. And if you don't know how to cope, you are going to be affected by this negatively. All right? So if you're around a stressful event for a very long time, then this can affect your mood. So stress has its own physiological consequences. It triggers that chemical effect or reaction in the brain like we talked about. And if stress is short-lived, then your body usually comes back to normal. So here it is. If you're in a stressful event, your body's going to be triggered, your brain is going to be triggered, and that fight or flight motion will come into play. So you'll have enough hormones being secreted either to fight to survive or to run away to survive. This usually is a short-term effect. After an hour or two or a few minutes, you should return to normalcy. You should come out of that mode where you're no longer in fight or flight motion, right? However, if this continues for a long time, then it will change the way your body and your brain works. And I was just listening to a study from a known psychologist. He said he's been doing this for over 40 years. And he said in his tests, the fight or flight motion being in overdrive for such a long time is what is causing depression in most people. What he's saying is when God made us, God put us in a garden. When God made man, he put him in a garden to work and to till the soil. He was not in an extremely stressful environment. Today, we live in an industrial lifestyle. We're living a more sedimentary lifestyle. We're living in a place where it's work, work, work for hours at end. Most people work 12 hours each day. Your body was not made to do that. You're constantly in a fight or flight mode, making decisions throughout the day for hours. And on top of that, we're drinking coffee, which also triggers your fight or flight reaction. So constantly you are bombarding this fight or flight reaction in the brain for 12 hours each day. This is not what it's made for. So over time, it causes your body to crash and causes depression. So this here, we have to be very careful of. The stressors in our life, how we handle the death of a loved one, how we handle our work, the situations that we put ourselves in. We have to handle that. And most times, brothers and sisters, we just have to come out of that stressful lifestyle. We just have to give up that job if it's too stressful. If you have to work for more than 12 hours every day for 5 days a week, that's too much for your system. Over time, that's going to wear you down. So we have to be mindful. Let's see how stress affects the body. Stress can be defined as an automatic physical response to any stimulus that requires you to adjust to change. Every real or perceived threat to your body triggers a cascade of stress hormones that produce a physiological change. So stress is anything that causes some changes in your body, whether physical that you can see or perceived mental, okay? And so we know of the sensation that happens when you're stressed. Your heart rate starts increasing, so your heart is pounding. You feel that in your chest. Your muscles tense. Your breathing quickens, and you start to feel sweaty. Think about while you were driving this morning and someone cut you off, right? And you had to react quickly. I know that when that happens to me, my legs shake. My leg just feels shaky, and the palms of my hands sweat. I'm telling you, and I'm not a sweaty palm person. That is just how your body reacts to stress. In that split moment when that person drove over into your lane and you had to react, fight or flight came on quickly. The hormones were secreted and all those sensations came about so that you could know that you are to veer to the side to get out of that accident. I mean, it sounds funny, but that is how quickly your body responds. There's no delay. Your body is perfectly amazing. And this electrical event happened in the mind. So your brain also is electrical. It is wired by neurons and dendrites, and how they connect and communicate. These things have to all work together. And when there's a dysfunction, then we have problems in how you feel and how you think. And so we can look at this, and this can be proven with technology. Today they have PET scans and MRIs, and they have led to a better understanding of how the brain works. They can see the region in your brain that regulates mood and how others function. So they're also looking at your memory and how this may be affected by depression. And this can be seen, brothers and sisters, on a PET scan or an MRI. It's amazing. And now they have identified that depression plays a significant role, and they have identified the parts of the brain, the amygdala, the thalamus, and the hippocampus. These are parts of the brain that directly affect how your mood works. So we see here that depression is not a demon spirit upon you. It is a medical illness. It is physical. It is just like hypertension, just like a stroke. It can be identified and it can be fixed.